He came back to a frozen mountain town carrying memories no one else could see. A former Navy SEAL, silent on a snow-covered bridge, mistaken for a threat. When the sheriff arrived, 2 K9s burst from the forest, trained, fierce, unstoppable. But they didn't attack. They broke. They leapt into his arms like family found again, because this wasn't just a soldier, and those weren't just dogs. This was a bond the wilderness couldn't erase. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, subscribe for more. Winter had sealed Bitter Creek beneath a hard, unyielding silence. The mountain town in western Montana lay wrapped in thick snow, roofs sagging under white weight, streets narrowed into icy corridors between banks of plowed slush. Pines crowded the hills beyond town, their branches heavy and dark, swallowing sound and light alike. The air cut clean and sharp, cold enough to sting the lungs, cold enough to make every breath feel deliberate. In Bitter Creek, winter did not creep in. It claimed the land and held it without apology. Troy Maddox arrived just before noon, his truck leaving shallow tracks that vanished almost as quickly as they formed. He parked near the edge of town, where the road curved toward the old wooden bridge spanning the frozen creek. Troy was a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean, disciplined build of someone who had never allowed his body to soften. His dark hair was cut short, practical, and his clean-shaven face carried sharp features that time and hardship had not dulled. He wore plain winter clothes, dark jeans, heavy boots, a weathered jacket, but nothing about him blended entirely. There was a stillness in the way he moved, a contained readiness, as if the cold itself had learned not to touch him. He crossed the bridge slowly and stopped at its center. The creek below was mostly frozen, a thin ribbon of black water whispering beneath the ice. Troy rested his gloved hands on the railing and stood there, unmoving. He did not check his phone. He did not scan the town. His gaze drifted toward the tree line, where the forest thickened and darkened, just as it had years ago. Bitter Creek was not his home. It never had been. But it was the place where something important had begun. Long before the snowstorms and the silence, before missions and loss hardened into memory, this town had been the backdrop to a different kind of winter. A training winter. Troy had been younger then, newly assigned, sharp-edged and restless. The forests outside Bitter Creek had been chosen for their brutal terrain. Steep slopes, deep snow, endless shadow. It was here, during those long weeks of cold and exhaustion, that Troy had learned what trust truly meant. Not the abstract kind written into manuals, but the kind earned step by step, breath by breath, in the dark. The memories returned uninvited, the crunch of snow under boots at dawn, frost collecting in his lashes, the sound of steady breathing beside him as they ran drills through the trees, never faltering, never questioning. Those memories had followed him for years, through deployments and distance, but they had never felt as close as they did now. Troy sat down on the bench at the center of the bridge. The wood creaked faintly beneath his weight. He had been there nearly an hour when the first curious glances came his way. Bitter Creek was small. People noticed stillness here, especially in winter. Across the street, inside a modest cafe with fogged windows, a woman paused mid-pour as she looked out. Her name was Ruth Calder, a lifelong resident with a habit of noticing details others missed. She was in her early 50s, sturdy and practical, with graying hair pulled into a loose braid and eyes sharpened by decades of watching storms roll in. She frowned slightly at the sight of the man on the bridge. "He's been there a while," she murmured to no one in particular. A couple of patrons glanced over, but shrugged it off. Travelers passed through sometimes. But Ruth kept watching. The man did not shift, did not fidget. He looked like he was listening to something no one else could hear. By mid-afternoon, the cold deepened. Snow drifted lazily from a sky the color of steel. Troy remained on the bench, posture straight, shoulders relaxed, but ready. His face was calm, yet something weighed behind his eyes. A heaviness that did not belong to grief, fresh and raw, but to something older, more settled, and no less painful. A year had passed since the accident, long enough for the world to expect him to move on, long enough for routines to return, for silence to replace questions. But standing here, in the place where everything had once made sense, Troy felt the past press close around him. He was not mourning anew. He was remembering too clearly. 3 hours passed. That was when the call reached the Bitter Creek Sheriff's Office. Harper Quinn set the receiver down slowly, her expression tightening. She was young for a sheriff, early 30s, with an athletic build and a presence that commanded attention without effort. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, practical and unadorned, and her gray-green eyes held a sharp intelligence that missed very little. Harper wore her uniform with ease, her posture straight but not rigid, the mark of someone who believed authority came from responsibility, not force. The call itself was simple enough. A man sitting on the bridge, not moving, not causing trouble. Just there. Under normal circumstances, Harper might have ignored it. But there were no normal circumstances in Bitter Creek that winter. For weeks she had been tracking a string of incidents in the national forest. Damaged cameras, broken locks on ranger cabins, evidence of heavy equipment moving through protected areas. Whoever was operating out there knew the terrain and knew how to disappear into winter. Every instinct Harper had told her the forest was being used to hide something illegal, something organized. A silent stranger watching the woods did not feel like a coincidence. Harper pulled on her winter coat and stepped outside, the cold biting immediately at her face. She drove slowly through town, tires crunching over packed snow, until she spotted the bridge ahead. The man was exactly where the caller had described him. She parked at a respectful distance and approached on foot. Her boots echoed softly against the frozen boards. As she drew closer, she took in details with practiced ease. The man was young, but not inexperienced. His hands rested loosely in his lap, calloused, steady. His breathing was slow and controlled. This was not a drifter killing time. This was someone waiting. "Afternoon," Harper said, her voice calm, even. The man turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her presence. His eyes were a striking blue, clear and alert, but not defensive. "Cold day," she added. "I've known colder," he replied quietly. Harper studied him. There was no fear in his tone, no bravado either, just truth. She noticed how his gaze kept drifting toward the forest, not scanning, not searching, but listening, as if the trees themselves carried a language he understood. "You've been here a while," she said. He nodded once. "Yes?" Harper felt the familiar pull of instinct, the same one that had guided her through dangerous calls and long nights. This man was not hiding. He was not watching for opportunity. He was anchored to something unseen. "You passing through?" she asked. Something like that. She accepted the non-answer, filing it away. The snow fell thicker now, softening the edges of the world. Harper straightened, her breath fogging in the air. "Well," she said, measured and professional, "I'm Sheriff Quinn, just checking in. Make sure everything's all right." The man looked at her fully then, and for the briefest moment, Harper saw something pass through his expression. Recognition, perhaps? Or understanding? "It is," he said. "It just doesn't look that way." Harper held his gaze, then nodded slowly. As she turned back toward her cruiser, one thought stayed with her, unshakable and clear. This man was not a threat, but he was the beginning of something Bitter Creek had not seen coming. The wind shifted, carrying a low, urgent sound from the hills beyond the bridge. It was not the groan of trees or the creak of ice. It was faster than that, rhythmic, purposeful. Harper Quinn's head turned first, her instincts flaring before her thoughts could catch up. She took a step back, one hand drifting toward her holster as the sound multiplied, boots of snow striking frozen ground with startling speed. From the slope above the creek, two dark shapes burst through the pale fog. They moved low and fast, bodies cutting clean lines through drifting snow, paws barely breaking rhythm. One was larger, broader through the chest, his coat a deep black threaded with sable. The other ran half a stride behind, leaner, golden markings flashing beneath frost. They did not hesitate. They did not slow. Harper's fingers tightened, her stance widening as training took over. "Hey!" she called, sharp and loud, though the word vanished into the wind. The dogs leapt. They did not lunge at her. They launched themselves at Troy. The impact knocked the breath from him. One slammed into his chest, front paws braced against his jacket as a familiar weight drove him backward. The other pressed hard into his side, muzzle bearing into his ribs, tail whipping through the air. Their bodies trembled with raw, uncontrolled energy, breath coming in broken gasps, voices cracking into high, desperate whines. Troy froze. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to sensation. Fur against his gloves, heat bleeding through layers of cloth, the unmistakable scent of cold and pine, and something achingly familiar. His hands lifted without conscious thought, fingers sinking into thick winter coats as if guided by muscle memory older than reason. "No?" The word slipped out, barely sound at all. The larger dog's head shoved under his chin, forcing his face up. Pale amber eyes locked onto his, bright and frantic. The second dog pressed closer, flank tight against Troy's leg, tail thudding in a rhythm that spoke of disbelief turned to joy. Valor? Ranger. The name surfaced with brutal clarity, not spoken aloud, but felt like a blow to the chest. Troy's breath shuddered as his hands tightened, one sliding to a scarred shoulder he knew by touch alone, the other finding the familiar curve behind an ear that had once been torn and stitched under desert light. They were alive. A year of restraint cracked open. Troy's jaw clenched, his shoulders drawing inward as if to shield the moment from the cold, from the watching world. He did not fall apart. He simply closed his eyes and leaned into them, forehead resting briefly against fur, warm with life. Harper stood frozen, shock cutting through her composure. These were not strays. She saw it instantly in their posture, the precision beneath chaos, the way one dog instinctively positioned himself between Troy and the open bridge, the other maintaining contact without blocking movement. This was trained behavior, buried under emotion, but unmistakable. "Easy," she said quietly, lowering her hand from her weapon. "Easy, boys." Neither dog looked at her. They had eyes only for Troy. He drew a steadying breath and slowly shifted his weight, settling back onto the bench. The dogs adjusted with him, seamless, practiced. Valor remained upright, head high but pressed close, while Ranger curled against Troy's thigh, body vibrating as if holding himself together took every ounce of will. "You did this?" Troy murmured, voice rough. "You found me." Ranger answered with a short, broken sound that might have been a bark if it hadn't dissolved into a whine. His nose nudged Troy's hand insistently, demanding proof. Harper took a cautious step closer, snow crunching beneath her boots. "You know them," she said. It wasn't a question. Troy opened his eyes. They were glass-bright now, but focused. "Yes." "How?" "By heart." The wind tugged at Harper's coat as she watched the dogs settle, their breathing slowly sinking with the man between them. This was not coincidence. This was recognition, something ancient and exact. Behind the tree line, deeper in the forest where snow lay undisturbed, Darnell Cray lowered his binoculars. Cray was a narrow man with a sharp nose and a jaw that never quite relaxed, as if perpetually clenched against the world. His beard grew in uneven patches, more neglect than style, and his eyes, dark and restless. Never stopped moving. He wore layered canvas and wool scavenged from surplus stores, clothes chosen for function rather than warmth. The cold had taught him economy. He had been tracking the dogs since dawn. When he'd first taken them in months ago, they'd been half dead. Ribs visible, paws torn raw, eyes dulled by pain and fear. He hadn't known what they were then, only that they learned fast and moved like ghosts through the trees. He'd fed them, chained them, used them. They had led him to hidden paths and blind spots in the forest where no ranger ever patrolled. When they ran clean. Cray had followed the tracks as long as he could, fury simmering with every mile. Those dogs were a liability now, not because of what they were, but because of what they could do. Through the glass he watched them collide with the man on the bridge. He expected aggression. He got devotion. Cray's stomach tightened. Whoever that man was, the dogs trusted him completely. That was dangerous. On the bridge, Harper crouched a little, lowering herself into the dog's line of sight, without forcing their attention. "They're trained," she said softly, more to herself than to Troy. "Military grade?" Troy nodded once. They were. A pause. Snow whispered against wood and ice. "They came from the forest," Harper said, "from the National Reserve." "I know." Her gaze sharpened. "How?" "Because they always do." She studied his face, the calm returning like a tide receding. "We're going to need to figure out where they've been," she said carefully. "And who else might be out there?" Troy looked down at the dogs. Valor's ears twitched, catching something far off. Ranger shifted, tail stilled. "They didn't come alone," Troy said. Harper followed his gaze toward the trees. The forest stared back, silent and impenetrable. Somewhere within it, Darnell Cray adjusted his grip and began to move. The sheriff's cruiser cut through Bitter Creek's quiet streets, tires humming over packed ice. Snow drifted steadily beneath the streetlights, turning the town into a study of muted color and softened edges. Troy sat in the back, shoulders squared, Valor pressed close to one knee, and Ranger angled protectively at his other side. Neither dog looked out the window. Their attention stayed fixed on him, as if distance itself might try to take him away again. The sheriff's office was a low brick building with a single flag snapping in the wind. Inside, warmth gathered in layers, radiators ticking, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. Harper Quinn ushered them through the lobby and into a smaller room off the main floor. She moved with efficiency, but her eyes kept returning to the dogs, cataloging details the way she always did when something refused to fit neatly into place. A second figure stepped in quietly from the hallway. Elias Grant was the department's youngest deputy, tall and slender with a mop of sandy hair that refused to lie flat. His wire-frame glasses magnified curious blue eyes, and his uniform looked a size too big for his narrow frame. Elias was meticulous, methodical, and far more comfortable with equipment than confrontation. He nodded once to Harper and offered Troy a tentative smile. "Scan kits ready," Elias said, already reaching for a handheld device. Harper knelt beside Valor first. The dog watched her closely, but did not move. His coat bore scars. Thin, pale lines beneath the fur earned long before Bitter Creek ever mattered to him. Harper ran the scanner over his shoulder. A soft beep cut through the room. Elias leaned in to read the display. His brows drew together. "Designation confirms," he said quietly. "Listed as missing in action. Operation date last winter." Harper swallowed. She shifted to Ranger, who flinched when the cold plastic touched his skin, then steadied himself with a low breath. Another beep, another line of data that refused to resolve itself into something clean. "Status undetermined," Elias said. Probability of fatality was logged, but never confirmed. Troy closed his eyes. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath until the room seemed to widen around him. He rested one hand on each dog, grounding himself in the present, the solid weight of bone and muscle, the steady heat beneath winter fur. "They pulled us out," he said at last. His voice was calm, but it carried a strain that had nothing to do with speaking. There was an underground blast. The tunnel collapsed in sections. Smoke everywhere. We lost visibility, lost comms. I went down hard. When I got back up, they were gone. Harper listened without interrupting, her posture still, receptive. Troy didn't dramatize the memory. He didn't need to. The clipped cadence of his words told her enough. "We searched," he continued, "as long as command would allow. Then they called it. Extraction orders came through. We couldn't stay." Elias glanced between the dogs and the screen in his hand. "If they were injured and disoriented," he said carefully, "they could have wandered for days." "Or been found," Harper added. She rose and circled them slowly, noting details that had escaped her earlier. Faint abrasions along Ranger's neck, a calloused ridge where fur refused to grow back. Valor's front paws bore signs of long travel. Pads thickened, edges split and healed rough. "These aren't from the forest alone," Harper said. "This is restraint, rope, chain." Troy's jaw tightened. Elias pulled up a map on the wall-mounted monitor, a digital overlay of the national forest bordering town. "Tracks near the bridge run northeast," he said, "toward restricted zones, old logging routes, no public access this time of year." Harper studied the map, the pieces aligning with a quiet inevitability. Damaged cameras, broken locks, heavy movement where no one should have been. "Someone's been using the winter to disappear," she said. Outside, the wind gusted harder, rattling the windows. Ranger lifted his head and stared at the door, ears pricked. Valor followed, body tense but controlled. Troy noticed. "They hear something." "Probably just the wind," Elias offered. "Not like that," Troy said. He trusted the dog's instincts the way some people trusted prayer. Harper dismissed Elias with a nod. "Pull any reports of illegal activity near those routes. Timber theft, poaching, anything recent." As Elias hurried off, Harper crouched again, lowering herself to the dog's level. "You didn't just survive," she murmured. "You figured out how to come home." Valor's tail thumped once, a quiet acknowledgement. Ranger leaned forward, pressing his forehead against Troy's knee. Harper straightened, resolve settling in. "Someone kept them," she said. "Used them, and when they got free, they didn't scatter. They came here. To you." Troy looked at the map again, then at the door. "Whoever it was," he said, "won't want them leading anyone back." Deep in the forest, beyond the reach of plowed roads and streetlights, Darnell Cray crouched beside a half-buried crate, gloved hands working fast. Snow clung to his beard, melting into his collar. His breath came shallow, controlled. He had heard the cruiser earlier, had watched it leave town. The dogs were gone. Not lost, gone with purpose. Cray snapped the lid shut and shoved the crate beneath a fallen log. He scanned the trees, eyes sharp, calculating. He didn't know who the man on the bridge was. He didn't care. What mattered was the risk. Dogs like that didn't choose lightly. Cray adjusted his pack and moved deeper into the trees, already planning his next step. If the dogs had chosen someone, that someone would have to be silenced. Back at the sheriff's office, Harper reached for her coat. "We'll keep you." "Here tonight," she told Troy. "Warm, fed. We'll sort the rest in daylight." Troy nodded. "They stay with me." "They will," Harper said. "That much I can promise." Valor and Ranger settled at his feet, eyes half-lidded but alert. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying tracks and secrets alike. But not for long. The forest swallowed sound the moment they crossed the boundary marker. Snow lay deep beneath the trees, undisturbed except for faint lines where animals had passed hours earlier. The air was colder here, sharper, the kind that burned the inside of the nose and made every breath feel earned. Harper Quinn moved carefully, boots crunching softly, her gloved hand steady on the strap of her rifle. She wore a dark winter jacket reinforced at the shoulders, practical and worn, her posture forward and focused. This was not recklessness. This was resolve. Troy Maddox followed a step behind, eyes scanning without appearing to. He moved differently now, lighter, quieter, guided by instincts that had never fully left him. Valor and Ranger ranged ahead, low to the ground, bodies flowing through the trees with practiced ease. They did not pull at the leads Harper had clipped on loosely. They barely seemed to need them. Their heads dipped and lifted in subtle rhythm, reading the forest like a living map. They found the first trail where the snow had been disturbed unnaturally. Not footprints, drag marks. Heavy loads moved in a hurry. Troy crouched, brushing a hand over the surface. The snow was compacted, crushed by weight that didn't belong to animals. "He knows these roots," Harper said quietly. Valor paused and looked back, ears flicking once. Then he turned and veered left, toward a narrow break between trees that barely registered as a path. Ranger followed without hesitation. The trail tightened as they went deeper. Branches clawed at jackets. The ground rose and fell sharply, hidden dips waiting to catch the careless. Harper felt the forest press in, the sense of being watched crawling up her spine. She trusted the dogs more than her eyes. A faint click snapped through the air. "Down!" Troy shouted. The explosion came a heartbeat later. Snow erupted in a violent plume, blasting outward and upward, sound muffled by the trees, but force undeniable. Harper felt herself shoved hard to the side, weight crashing into her as Ranger struck her legs and knocked her into the snow. The shock stole her breath, the cold biting through layers as she hit the ground. At the same instant, Valor slammed into Troy's chest and dragged him backward, claws tearing through snow as they tumbled away from the blast radius. Heat and pressure washed past them, then silence fell, heavy and ringing. Harper lay still for a second, checking herself piece by piece. Her ears rang, but nothing felt broken. Ranger hovered over her, body tense, eyes wide and alert, breath fogging the air. "I'm good," she said, voice rough. "I'm good." Troy pushed himself up, snow clinging to his jacket. He looked at Valor, hands gripping the dog's shoulders. "You saw it," he said, not asking. Valor's gaze stayed locked on the trees ahead. Troy straightened, heart pounding. Not with fear, but with clarity. "They didn't survive by luck," he murmured. "They learned. They adapted." Harper caught that, the weight behind it. She rose carefully, brushing snow from her sleeves. "We keep moving," she said. "He's close." They advanced slower now. Every step was measured. Valor and Ranger shifted patterns, weaving wider, noses low, avoiding areas where the snow felt wrong. The forest opened briefly into a shallow ravine, the ground cut by an old logging road half buried in ice. On the far side, Darnell Cray watched them through branches heavy with snow. His face was tight, jaw set as he thumbed the detonator's dead switch and tossed it aside. He moved fast, breath sharp in his chest, anger sharpening into something colder. He hadn't expected them to come this far, hadn't expected the dogs to move like this. With purpose, with memory. Cray set another trap in seconds, hands working with brutal efficiency. Wire, tension, pressure plate, buried beneath fresh snow. He backed away, eyes flicking toward the sounds of movement behind him. He didn't want to kill them. He wanted time. Valor stopped abruptly. Ranger froze mid-step. Troy raised a fist. Harper halted instantly. Valor circled, nose skimming the ground, then angled away, tugging the lead just enough to signal danger. Troy nodded, heart hammering with pride and fear braided together. They skirted the trap and pressed on. The ravine narrowed, trees crowding closer, escape routes thinning. Cray broke into a run, boots slipping on ice. He burst into a dead-end clearing hemmed in by rock and timber. He spun, lifting his weapon, eyes wild. "Stay back!" he shouted, voice cracking. Harper stepped forward, rifle steady. "Drop it!" Cray laughed, a short, broken sound. "You don't even know what you're walking into." Valor growled low, a warning that vibrated through the cold. Cray's finger tightened. He slammed a switch. The secondary charge detonated behind them, not close enough to kill, but enough to throw up a wall of snow and debris. The shock wave knocked Harper to one knee and sent Troy staggering. When the air cleared, Cray was already running again, vanishing into the trees as branches snapped and snow cascaded down in his wake. Harper swore under her breath, rising fast. "He's bleeding time," she said. "He won't get far." Troy looked at Valor and Ranger. Their eyes were locked on the direction Cray had fled, bodies vibrating with readiness. "Soon," he said softly. "We'll finish this." They moved again, deeper into the forest, the bond between them tightening with every step. Harper felt it then, not just trust, but understanding. Troy didn't command the dogs. He read them, and they read him back. In the cold heart of the forest, with night closing in, something solid took shape between the sheriff and the soldier. Not words, not promises, just the quiet certainty that neither of them would turn away. Ahead, the trees closed ranks, and the hunt was not over. Snow fell heavier as night settled over the national forest, thick flakes blurring the line between ground and sky. Headlights cut narrow tunnels through the dark as a convoy of vehicles rolled to a halt along a service road buried beneath drifts. Forest Service trucks formed a loose perimeter, engines idling low. Uniformed rangers stepped out, faces hard and focused, breath fogging the air. At the center of it all stood Marshal Owen Hale, a senior federal forest ranger with a broad, weather-beaten frame and a calm authority earned over 3 decades in the backcountry. His gray beard was trimmed close, his eyes steady beneath a fur-lined cap. Hale had seen what unchecked greed could do to protected land, and tonight he intended to end it. Troy Maddox stood beside Harper Quinn at the edge of the trees. Valor and Ranger sat forward, bodies aligned, eyes fixed on the faint glow deeper in the forest. The dogs were quiet now, not tense, not restless, ready. Hale nodded once at Harper. "We have him boxed in," he said. "Main camp is 30 yards ahead. One way out." Harper checked her weapon and signaled the team forward. She moved with purpose, her posture grounded and unflinching. Troy followed, steps light despite the snow, instincts guiding him through shadow and silence. Valor and Ranger flowed ahead, reading the terrain with precision that felt almost reverent. The clearing opened suddenly. A rough structure squatted against the rock face, a timber shack reinforced with scrap metal and tarps. Floodlights hung crooked from poles, casting harsh white light over stacked crates and equipment. The air smelled of fuel, sap, and chemicals. Darnell Cray burst from the shack, panic finally breaking through his fury. His clothes were torn and snow-streaked, face drawn tight, eyes darting for escape that no longer existed. "Don't move!" Harper's voice cut through the night. Cray froze. His shoulders sagged as he looked around, realizing the forest had turned against him. Rangers closed in from all sides, weapons raised but controlled. Valor stepped forward, a low warning rumble vibrating in his chest. Ranger flanked to the side, blocking any last attempt at flight. Cray dropped to his knees. The sound of cuffs snapping shut echoed sharply in the cold. Inside the shack, the scale of his operation became undeniable. Crates of rare hardwood, old-growth pine and cedar, stacked and tagged for transport, steel traps lined the walls, rusted teeth still stained dark. Shelves held unmarked chemicals and modified equipment designed to erase tracking data and blind surveillance systems. In the far corner sat 2 reinforced cages, chains dangling loose, the metal scarred and bent. Harper stared at them, jaw tightening. Troy said nothing. Valor and Ranger stood still, eyes on the cages, tails low but steady. Hale cataloged the evidence with methodical precision. "This will hold," he said quietly. "All of it." The arrest moved swiftly. After that, Cray was escorted away, his head bowed, the forest silent as if bearing witness. Weeks later, the courtroom in the county seat filled with winter light. Snow clung to boots and coats as people took their seats. Troy sat near the back, Valor and Ranger lying calmly at his feet, their presence steady and unmistakable. Cray stood before the bench, smaller now, stripped of bravado. The charges were read in full. Federal timber theft, illegal trafficking of protected resources, animal cruelty, assault on law enforcement, and the use of lethal traps within a national preserve. The judge, Eleanor Whitcomb, was a composed woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an unyielding sense of balance. Her voice carried without strain. "For crimes against this land, its people, and its animals," she said, "the court sentences Darnell Cray to 18 years in federal prison. Additionally, you are permanently barred from entering any protected wilderness area or engaging in any activity involving wildlife." The gavel fell. Final. Outside, snow drifted softly, the world moving on. Back in Bitter Creek, life resumed its quiet rhythms. Harper sat at her desk late one evening, writing by the glow of a single lamp. Her report was thorough and unambiguous. Valor and Ranger, she documented, were no longer federal assets. Their files had been closed following the incident a year prior. Legally and ethically, they belonged with the man they had chosen. The paperwork took time, but the outcome was never in doubt. On a clear winter morning, the town gathered at the wooden bridge. A simple bronze plaque was mounted to the railing, its surface catching pale sunlight. The inscription was modest, the words chosen carefully by neighbors who understood what mattered. Troy stood beside Harper, shoulders relaxed for the first time since he'd arrived. Valor and Ranger sat at his sides, tails sweeping gentle arcs across the snow. Harper glanced at him, a small smile softening her usually guarded expression. "Looks like they found their way home." Troy nodded, his gaze drifting toward the forest and back again. "So did I." Snow fell quietly around them. The bridge no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt like an ending and a beginning, woven together. This winter, for the first time in a long while, Troy was not alone. Some bonds are forged not by time, but by trust, sacrifice, and shared survival. In our daily lives, we may lose people, places, or even parts of ourselves. But that doesn't mean what mattered is gone forever. Loyalty finds its way back. Courage leaves echoes. And sometimes, when we least expect it, life gives us a second chance to come home. If this story moved you, reminded you of someone you love, or gave you hope that no one is ever truly forgotten, please share it with someone who needs that reminder today. We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you believe in stories of loyalty, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for watching. Stay warm, stay kind, and never stop believing in the way back home.